Hey, thank you. Greetings from Belgium. Um, just to present myself, I studied in the years 1968, 1970s, which uh, forms the ideas you have. 68 was a special year in the west of Europe when students demonstrated and brought new ideas. And based on that, I would like to formulate a starting point, which is that the care for heritage, like many other elements in our social life, depends on its social basis. Uh, Government in a democratic system, they are always influenced by the questions and demands of citizens. Heritage management is, I think, preferably a bottom-up process where citizens take their responsibility. If this does not happen, the selection and funding of heritage will be the sole responsibility of government and politicians. In these years, government is less and less willing to invest in uh, something which is seen as um, it it's not immediately important. It's uh, in many countries the capacity and the resources needed for conservation of heritage are reduced in a time when money is needed to solve recent crises. The nuanced and diversified role of citizens, their view on what heritage is and what they want to inherit, is fundamental if we want to develop an objective care of heritage. Heritage should not longer be chosen on the basis of political philosophy or what does not satisfy satisfies that philosophy. It's not a damnatio memoria where we choose what we keep and what we destruct. Heritage, like the practice of teaching of history, I'm an historian, has been too long an element to promote the story or the raison d'etre of a state. I'm now going to show you my presentation, which is about the situation, what I experienced in Barcelona, and it's called Nosaltres Decidim. Nosaltres Decidim, it's not only a slogan of the great independence demonstrations in Catalonia, but also a proposition of neighborhood committees and of the occupied movement after the death of General Franco in 1975. Uh, it, um, it means it are we who decide. The role of citizens and citizens organizations are the most important for the safeguarding and reuse of industrial buildings in Barcelona since 1975. I would like to explain that development uh, in the, on the backgrounds of social and political evolutions of the last 50 years. How the struggle for buildings and public spaces led to the emergence of the concept of what they call a democratic and participatory urbanism. Since the last century, Barcelona has been a laboratory of urban and architectural development, including the preservation and redevelopment of industrial heritage. Most people who go to Barcelona only see Gaudi, but there is much more changing and there's much more interesting things happening. Just to explain you, as most people don't know very much about what Catalonia is, um, you have to understand it. Until after the War of the Spanish Succession, 1713, when a French Bourbon came on the throne, the principalities of Spain had great autonomy. That was lost in 1714 when a Franco-Spanish army took Barcelona after months of siege. All the existing rights were taken away from the Catalans. The use of their own language was forbidden. And from the beginning of the 19th century, the region revived, economically speaking, in any way. The production of wines and drinks, textiles, metal processing, construction were the basis of a strong population growth. In 1844, the first railway on the Iberian Peninsula ran between Barcelona and Mataró. It was in those years that there was a revival of a demand for the restoration of the own culture. But then came the 20th century. Beginning of the 20th century, we had the dictatorship of Primo de Rivera. Catalan was again forbidden. We had in 1938, after a strong election success, that the left-wing Republican Party declared the Catalan independence, which stayed till 1939. Between 36 and 39, we had the Civil War, then the dictatorship of Franco, and in the 1968, it started to change. First, independent associations were established. What was the reason for this? Well, tourists came to the costas in Spain, and they brought new ideas. They brought sometimes publications which were not allowed in Spain. You had the radio and television from France, who showed the students' movement, the strikes of the 1968. And in 72, the first citizens' campaigns started to save factories. 1977, after the death of Franco in 75, the first democratic elections started. 1980 are the years of change. The first protected buildings in the 1970s protected what they call the Bien de Cultural de Interés Nacional, or the Fábrica Casa Ramona, at the bottom of the Montjuic. It was an old spinning mill in Catalan modernist style, built by the architect Josep Puig i Cadafalch, one of the most important Catalan architects of the end of the 19th century. And he was a Catalan autonomist. The owner of the mill, Casa Ramona, was also a Catalan autonomist. And so this is a statement. It was built, the factory was built in 1912. This was a statement of the Catalan identity in one of the largest textile mills of those years. After the bankruptcy in 1920, it was used as a warehouse for the World Exhibition of 1929. Then it was used by the Guardia Civil, by a warehouse for the police and the vehicle park. And in 1976, it was legally protected as a historic monument. As a result of the history, all the buildings have been preserved. And in 2002, it was bought by the large Catalan bank, La Caixa, who transformed it in a splendid cultural center with exhibitions on art, architecture, etc. 1968, 1980, is El Temps, the Years of Changes. What happened? In 1973, for the first time, uh, uh, a song festival took place in Catalan language, singing the protest songs which came from the United States, like songs by We Shall Overcome, etc. Uh, that was based on the Nova Canson, the new songs which did rise based on French chansons. The influence of France was also always very big in Catalonia. The influence of protest songs, you have Louis Lach, a man who's still active, who wrote L'Estaca. It's a song of protest which is still used and which was translated in Polish as Mira Mira, the song of Solidarność, and later Dima Dima, the song of the Tunisian revolution. In 1973, citizens started to associate on a local basis the neighborhood associations, l'Association de Veins et Veines, and those were demanding better social and cultural services and better social and cultural infrastructure. They were creating awareness of the social and economic history of the neighborhood. 1974, FC Barcelona beats for the first time Real Madrid by 5-0. I was then in Barcelona, and I remember that we haven't been able to sleep for 2 nights as there were so many festivities, people singing in the street because Madrid was beaten by Barcelona. Now, in 76, remember that Franco died in 75, the citizens started to collect and save their heritage. It's important that before you couldn't deal with Catalan history, so the local associations, they started. The first one was the historic archives set up by the people in the Poblenou, and you have in those years an outbreak of creativity which used vacant buildings, streets and squares. In response to years of oppression, Barcelona suddenly becomes the creative center of Spain, with alternative music and theater groups in the street, with vacant buildings and cooperatives squatted and used by the citizens. A good example is El Fura del Paus, a group who started with street theater. And I have a small film which shows what they did. There's nothing from them, left from the 1979, early 1980s, but this is a performance of 1984. Almost 40 years ago. They worked locally. Till in 1992, they were asked to organize the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. And suddenly they became world famous for what they did. Today they perform in all big cities of the world. The second thing which happens, which is important to understand the change of mentality, is that during the Franco era, the Catalan view on history and also Catalan history itself was forbidden. As a reaction, the associations and study groups, local history groups, quickly emerged, dedicated to the preservation, the study, and publication of the history of the regions and the neighborhoods. The first one in Barcelona was the Archiu Historique del Poblenou, a small group, but who, since they started, digitized more than 16,000 images of the history of the Poblenou. A second movement, it started in the beginning of the 1970s, when the commercial activities were seized in the Mercat del Born, the Born market, and demolition was proposed for the construction of a car park. The local citizens, they opposed against it, and they demanded the preservation of the buildings, and they managed to stop the demolition for the time being. It became a campaign to find a reuse against these speculators, and they wanted to make the market available for the local community. What they were asking was to change the market in a Ateneo Popular. What's an Ateneo Popular? They were popular social cultural associations for workers, founded by workers, often from a cooperative movement at the end of the 19th century. They had a revival in the 1930s and then were forbidden by the Franco regime. So they had a very strong political, cultural character, and many Ateneos were situated in the corner of libertarianism, where leftist, Republican, and Catalan united. So this idea rose immediately in 1976, and people went on the streets to demonstrate. What happened? After the closure, it fell into a state of disruption. It was restored between 1977 and 1981, thanks to the pressure of citizens. Between 1981 and 2002, it was used for a wide variety of activities. And in 1985, I visited the exhibition, a large exhibition, Catalunya, la fábrica de España, Catalonia, the fabric of Spain. In 2002, it was a plan to host the Biblioteca, the provincial library in the market, and they started before starting the works with archaeological diggings, and these showed unique sites of the Ribera neighborhood and the siege of Barcelona in 1714. It becomes a place of memory. It's the largest indoor archaeological park in Europe, and it was opened in 2013 as El Born Centre Culturel. That's the situation today, where you have the archaeological remains, and on the side you have exhibitions on culture and history. Well, we have been talking about some places. El Born is central. We are going to speak about Sants la Bordeta, which is in the south of Barcelona. We are going to speak about the Poblenou. These were the two first industrialized areas in Spain. From the Poblenou in 1844, a railway ran to Mataró, and this created a line of industries between Poblenou and Mataró. And another place where we go, it's Sant Andreu, where we have a quite interesting initiatives. 1976, we have the battle for the Vaporvell de Sans. Vaporvell was a steam-driven textile mill, which was important from a historical point of view because there happened started the first strike in Spain in 1855. So it was a lieu de mémoire for many people, and it was sold to a department store who wanted to knock it down to build a supermarket. The local population of Sants, who is always a little bit anarchistic, who's always left-wing, who's always protesting against everything, they started a campaign to save it. In 1983, they managed that the buildings were expropriated by the city, and the restoration started in 98 to house the central district library and a school. It took almost 25 years before it was realized, and during all this time, the local associations were pushing to save the building. A second example in the Poblenou is El Flor de Maig, which was one of the largest cooperatives in Spain, dating from 1890. And you see some old pictures of the cooperative, and which would become, it was confiscated during the Franco regime, sold to a Francoist family who was still owning it in 1967, when the neighborhood committee launched a campaign for better social cultural spaces, which culminated in "We want an Ateneo Popular à la Flor de Maig." Demonstrations. In 1978, the building was occupied, and the activists managed the city to rent it from the owners and put it at their disposal. But in 2012, when government changed, the city broke the lease and the users were evicted. 5 months later, it was occupied again. And the city was forced to retrace its steps. The Flor de Maig is today a living and active neighborhood center managed by the associations of the Poblenou. You can go there and visit it. It's open to the public. Now, the next years, 77, 79, were important. In 77, you had the first free elections in Spain. You had in 79 the first free municipal elections, and in 1980 the first election for the regional Catalan parliament, the Generalitat. What was the effect of this? Well, most elected representatives, they came out of the neighborhood movements, and they had sympathy for what happened in these by these movements. This public authorities which they ran, they wanted to support the movement, and they decided to buy many buildings who had been subject of campaigns or who had been squatted, and this had as effect that one had to make a choice between or working with within the administrative framework or being independent, self-management, what the Catalans call autogestion. And this became a discussion between two points of view in society. The city of Barcelona bought, for example, Can Filipa, which was a large textile mill, and transformed it into a cultural center, sports center, and where the Archive Historique de Barcelona now has its room and place to store its collection. There were also a lot of green space created when buildings had to be demolished. The Olympic Games became important. In 1986, Barcelona City Council established the limited company, the Villa Olímpica Società Anónima, which later became the limited company Barcelona Holdings Olympics, to being responsible for the opening of the city to the world and to link the city to the seashore. They were responsible for building hotels, accommodation for the athletes, etc. And the result was that the real estate groups behind these companies, they decided to knock down, to demolish a complete neighborhood, which was Icaria. You see all pictures of it. And that's what happened in the years just before and after the Olympics from 1992. New Icaria is this what we had. It was also a time that the small scale was changed into a large scale bourgeois culture. The small museums had to go and were replaced by the MACBA, the Museum of Modern Art, the Ciutat del Teatre, and large skyscrapers building. The only building that benefited from the Olympics and still is existing, also thanks to the neighborhood who proposed a reuse of it. It's the old Noord station, which was used for the table tennis matches during the Olympics, and is now still a sports center, which is often and actively frequented by citizens. The post-Olympic period resulted in traumas. Between the next 3 years, the Spanish economy had a recession and then a strong economic growth till 2001. From the second half of the 1990s, the loft movement gained acceptance among investors. The first one was the Vapor, a steam textile factory which was transformed into homes, workshops and offices. That's it before transformation. This is the plan, and this is the transformation afterwards. In 2015, lofts in the Poblenou were sold between 4,400 and 6,600 euros a square meter. Traditional houses at an average of 3,700, 3,800 euros a square meter. So lofts, the new lofts, were not immediately intended for the existing residents, and the gentrification of the region faced a lot of opposition. Because of the political crisis since 2017 and COVID, prices went down. But yesterday I found these offers on the market in Barcelona. You see 6,500 euros a square meter, and this is a larger one, 5,600 euros a square meter. If you want to buy a loft, you have to calculate at least €500,000 in Barcelona. Lofts were seen as plans were made to replace industrial sites and vacant buildings. There was one difficulty. Most of them were used or claimed by artists, young people, vegans, homeless people, and revolutionary left-wing organizations. It was especially difficult to get the artists out of them because they had created the subculture and they were supported by the neighborhood. And in the meantime, the civic organizations saw the role of the city council as a kind of cooperation with estate speculators and complying with their wishes. This led to two visions of what Richard Florida called the power of place and quality of place. It came into a period of globalization, anti-globalization in 2001, when the rise of the indignados in Spain. In 2001, the protest stopped the World Economic Forum in Barcelona. The city changes. It's the culture that has to save the city now. And in 1996, the Institut de Cultura de Barcelona was established, who made a strategic plan for the cultural sector, saying that the cultural sector is the main actor of change, the locomotive of transformation to a service, from a service economy to a post-industrial city, and then into a knowledge metropolis. In 2000, the Plan 22 Arrobas Barcelona was voted, and the Poblenou had to be transformed into the city of knowledge economy. 2,000 hectares of old industrial sites would have been used to attract new business. The large road, the Diagonal, had to be extended through a living neighborhood with high-rise buildings and museums along it. And the Congress Center Forum had to be built. The forum, which at the border of Sant'Adria de Besós would become a Forum Universal de las Culturas, a universal forum for culture. Organizations expected a lot from it, but as the event approached, it turned out to be yet another form of city marketing in which all sorts of important thinkers, philosophers and cultural theorists were featured rather than the basic movements. Moreover, the forum had to be, for the forum, a number of buildings which were seen as important had to be demolished and urbanized. And that was also the place where, during the Franco period, the concentration Camp de la Botta, was situated, where more than 1,700 political prisoners were killed. This caused, of course, the rise of a strong opposition, and the conflict arose between what they called a planned city and an inhabited city. What's the place of planning? What's the role of planning? And what's the role of citizens? The term democratic and participatory urbanism was launched and placed on the urban agenda. However, the struggle also had positive consequences for the industrial heritage. First of all, it became clear that industrial heritage in the old neighborhoods had an historical and social importance, and it was part of the identity of Barcelona and Catalonia. The citizens' movement gained connection with experts, art historians, architects, urban planners, sociologists, and it were not only protesters anymore, but there was more content, and new study and action groups formulated concrete and alternative proposals. From the city side, from the municipal side, was launched the idea of fabriques de création, transform old factories into creative spaces. And one of the best known, there are now some 20 fabriques de création, is the old Fabrae coats, and Catalan Scottish company spinning mill, which becomes a center where artists can have residence, can have exhibitions, but where also local people can try out initiatives they want to do. That's the interior of it. Other buildings were transformed into exhibition centers. The old grain mill Farinera del Clot is one of the examples. It's typical that parts of the machinery are kept in the exhibition rooms, and thus, as part of the history, you still can feel in the building, while modern art can be exhibited. Oliva Artes was an old factory where machinery was produced, and it had always been an important place in the workers' history of Poblenou. In 2008, there was a plan to demolish the buildings to make a large park, a central park, but a few days before the demolition should start, a campaign by the neighborhood association convinced the town council to save the main building. The hall was acquired by the Musea d'Historia de Barcelona, the historic museum, and tells there the industrial history of Barcelona. And it also holds temporary exhibits in the main hall. This is part of the historic exhibits. And we had an exhibition on the industrial heritage of Flanders there some 3 years ago. Universities move into old factories. the Calneraño was informed into the audio-visual campus of the Universitat Pompeu Fabra. And that's only one example, but between, let's say, the years end of the 1990s and 1910, 1915, there was an enormous intellectual development of the conservation of industrial buildings. Also, private people took the initiative. In addition, business leaders, creative entrepreneurs took the forefront of the projects. One example is the Fabrica de Creación, now Ivanov. It was in 1959 that an architect designed, Anmela, designed a new building for the Ivanov Paintings Company, owned by Victor Ivanov Bauer. The building was not constructed before 1967 and inaugurated in 1968. So it's a very recent building. After the company was sold to the Dutch multinational Akzo Nobel, the building was leased to various companies till it was in 1997 purchased, bought by the architect and photographer Xavier Baziana, who wanted to establish there his professional studios. But moreover, he also developed around his studios a new space for creation, production, and dissemination of modern contemporary culture. It was included in the list of Fabriques de Création in 1910 and is now jointly managed by a non-profit trust, while the ownership of the building belongs to the city of Barcelona. The No Ivanov is a performing arts residence that organizes and supervises the creation of theatrical production. Its mission is to facilitate the creation process, the mobility of projects, and an internationalization of art companies. It also has room for local initiatives for the neighborhood. For example, when I visited it 3 weeks ago, a local choir who was singing in one of the buildings. The same man, Xavier Bazana, started in some 2 miles from the original building a new initiative, the No Bostik, in an old factory of an American multinational, the Boston Blacking Company, who specialized in the production of adhesives for footwear. The No Bostik is a self-managed meeting and artistic creation space in the Sagrera district of Barcelona. Its management is supported by the neighbors and it is based on voluntary work and the creation of by local people. It organizes video shows, concerts, exhibits of art and photography, production of plays, with a clear commitment to collaboration and collective patronage in order not to depend, that's their philosophy, not to depend on subsidies and to maintain a creative and social line more independent of political interference. The project was hampered by the economic crisis of 2008, and after being closed for a couple of years, it reopened in 2015. The spaces are, the inside of the spaces are painted white, while the outside of the walls, for the outside of the walls, artists have been invited to decorate it by graffiti. It organizes all kinds of initiatives. And the complex, the self-managed complex, exists of a set of 6,000 square meters, which before the COVID crisis was used by artists daily. Canary Car, the Battle for Canary Car, is a story of tens of years. It tells the history of the struggle to save industrial buildings. And in 1990, the Canary Car would be demolished, and the neighborhood, they insisted on preserving it because of its historical importance. In 2000, only the chimney, after 10 years of campaigning, only the chimney was protected by the Catalan Cultural Heritage Law. 2001, the City Council approved a plan to demolish the complex and replace it by 7,000 square meter of office part, and only a small part, which is the entrance and the central tower, would be preserved. Citizens continued their campaign. In 2005, all the individual action groups united in a platform which contacted politicians and officials at all levels, the municipality, this Catalan parliament, and even the president, the Spanish president at that moment. They were supported by experts. That's important because that gave them arguments which they could use on a higher level. Multidisciplinary working groups, and the University of Barcelona. And in that year, 28th of April, a first major demonstration takes place in the streets of Poblenou. It's the first one. It continues all over 2005. And the demand for saving Canary Car becomes a unanimous view of the residents of the district. Actions continue, and on 4th of April 2006, the Municipal Planning Commission announces that 70% of the complex would be preserved and get a new use. But 1 hour after that statement, a suspicious fire broke out, and a couple of days later, there was a second fire. In 2008, the entire complex was protected as historic monument. The citizens' movement had won a battle, and government was trying to save their image, but of course the economic financial crisis of 2008 made it difficult to set up, to finance the ideas which came out. In 2009, the idea was launched to establish in the buildings Lingua Mon, a house of languages to promote the knowledge, the understanding, and the use of other languages, multilingualism and multiculturalism, but the project was withdrawn in 2001 because of the precarious financial situation. One of the wings now houses Hangar, an artistic research and production center financed by public-private partnership between government and industry. One of the buildings houses a youth center, the Casal de Joves, which is now works are under its way. And in 2015, the remaining buildings were given into concession to the University of Barcelona, which planned to install here a park of humanities and social sciences, but due to the cost, it has been reduced and redirected to a center of art science and trainings. Canada was and still is a symbol of a conflict between citizens and planners, and citizens asked questions, wrote out alternatives, and were able to think beyond the intellectual framework of administrations, politics, and experts. They opened new doors, new ideas. The actions around Canada show the shift in the groups working to preserve industrial heritage in Barcelona, from marginals to include intellectuals, historians, architects, and what you should call traditional heritage conservationists. And while within the old squatters movement, which is still existing, debate is going on for the first time if they continue as illegal occupiers or if they should better negotiate with the authorities. The Canada gave a line. In the south, in Sans La Borghetta, the local citizens took the initiative on the 11th of July 2011. The large Canbayo Cambayo was taken in self-governance, autogestion, and since it is still, it are the citizens who develop plans, ideas to reuse the buildings, and you have in one of the blocks no performance and spaces and studios, exhibition rooms, an own library created by the citizens, cooperatives, a space for starting solidarity cooperatives and alternative companies like a printing office with old printing material, an own bar cafeteria, which is run by local people. And they even have an own microbrewery, which they run. Now, what the situation today? 3 weeks ago, on the 11th and 12th June, there was a big party for the 10th anniversary of the occupation of the buildings, a century, 10 years of what they called construction of an alternative way. It's the autojet, the self-governed district association who runs it, and who has organized one of the last things. It's an alternative anti-authoritarian self-management managed children's garden. Also, Barcelona city was in the beginning not in favor of the occupation, not at all. They could do little against the overwhelming support of population, and they hoped that the commitment would disappear after a few months, but that was a miscalculation. When they realized it, they changed position, and because the site is too big to be run entirely by the citizens, they started consultation with local people, and they developed new ideas together with the citizens for interpretation and opening the site to the public. This was presented in December last year, the plan to reuse and to open a green area of 26,000 square meters. A second initiative was that in one of the buildings, the School of Audiovisual Techniques and Media was established by the city. The building is restored by the city. Unfortunately, I couldn't get in because of COVID, but I will go back to see what the interior looks like. So, Camballo is a second important success, and the most recent success is the Torre d'Aigües de Barcelona, the Bezos, also in the Poblenou district. It was the water tower which was opened in 1882, but after a couple of years functioning, it's near the sea, one had to conclude that the water provided was too salty and not could not be supplied to population. So that stopped. This facility was sold to an English company, then to the Societat General de Aigües de Barcelona, who changed the production of water into water production for the regional industries. This area was bought by the company who constructed railway wagons, locomotives, and so on. And in 1992, the urban reorganization of the area was planned, and at the end of the story, the water tower, which was defended by the citizens, stood as only element in the middle of a large urban void. In the meantime, the tower was legally protected, and in 2010 it was started the restoration. And now it's situated in the middle of apartment blocks, high-rise blocks, and the result was this year. congratulations to the Poblenou. But the story is not finished. Also, there are today other priorities. The visions, the initiatives continue for heritage, against real estate speculation, and tourist nuisance. These are pictures I took a couple of days ago. Speculation out of the region. Poblenou lives and fights, and against the hotel who come to the district. Thanks for your interest. That's it. I